Superior de Investigaciones Científicas in Madrid, and École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. Has won several awards and honors from the Spanish Ministry of Science, Center for Advanced Studies at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and Center of Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science, among others. He has also won several awards, including the John Nicholas Brown Prize from the Medieval Academy and the Herbert Baxter Adam Prize for the American Historical Association for his book, Community of Violence, Persecution of Minorities in the Middle Ages. Suffice to say that Professor Nuremberg has a substantial and impressive list of publications, among which are his collaboration as an editor and of several books, The Body of Christ in the Art of Europe and New Spain between 1150 and 1800s, Judaism and Christian Art, Aesthetic Anxieties from the Catacombs to Colonialism, and Race and Blood in the Iberian World. Professor Nuremberg led its publications, and he gave a lecture last night about it, in January 2013, Anti-Judaism, the Western Tradition. He sets out to write a history of the ways in which critical thought has been produced by thinking about Judaism at the same time that he creates the Jewedness it criticizes in the world. The book examines various works done by pagans, Christian, Muslim, and secular dating back from the ancient Egypt to the 20th century. Works that present all ideas about Judaism to new kinds of works as a way of thinking of their own world. In this manner, Professor Nuremberg, through the topic or category of anti-Judaism, presents how each work not only engaged in the past history or vision of Judaism while transforming it, but also how the work in a way reshaped the historical context where it came from and the possibility of thought for the future. This evening's lecture, 1391, From Medieval Massacre to Modern Political Theology, is in part of his latest project that Professor Nuremberg is working at the moment, entitled Neighboring Faith, Christian, Islam, and Judaism, Medieval and Modern. In this new book, he explored the lived experience of interreligious contacts and exchanges with conceptual categories in multi-religious societies such as Spain, and how these interactions not only help to shape the way that each religious group perceive each other, but also themselves. So it is a pleasure to
Thank you. I'm sorry I have a cold, but thank you for staying late into the evening for this apocalyptic event, the massacre which many contemporaries thought was a herald of the apocalypse. So I'd like to talk about one of the most massive, best documented, and least studied episodes of violence against Jews in the Middle Ages. You might disagree with the least studied part. The massacres and mass conversions that swept through the Iberian Peninsula in 1391. These events marked the beginning of what is often called the converso problem that led to the rise of the Inquisition, to the imposition of the purity of blood statutes, and the eventual expulsion of the Jews from Spain. But I'd like to focus today on the massacres themselves as they unfolded in one especially well-documented city, the city of Valencia. As you can see from the chapter I put on the web, which is basically what I'm presenting to you today, I'm offering a detailed reconstruction, one of the very few available in any language, of a medieval massacre. But my goal is also to explore the constitutional implications of that massacre. For although we have very little access to the feelings and motives of the participants in the violence, we can say a great deal about the meanings they attributed to that violence and the ways in which they sought to justify it. Those meanings and justifications were above all about the proper foundations of power in a Christian polity. In this sense, the massacres of 1391 constituted, among other things, a constitutional crisis, a moment in which competing Christian visions of sovereignty and subjecthood were posed upon the bodies of Jews. I want to explore those competing visions, not least because I think that their constitutional implications of this crisis are not confined to the Middle Ages. They are also instructive for us today, as so many refugees from secularism, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish refugees from secularism, look once more towards theology in their quest for transcendent norms that might ground the legal values of apology. So the key word here is political theology, to which I'll return. But what I should, what a surprise. I'm in shock. What I also really want to say is that this is a self-conscious attempt to use a medieval archive as a dossier against which to think our present moment. And so in that sense, it's an exercise in something that I think we all are always confronting. How do we make our work relevant for the present without imposing the present on, inappropriately, and that's the devil comes in that word, inappropriately on the past. But let's begin in the Middle Ages, and not in the late 14th century, but rather in the 12th, when princely claims to powers of decision over Jews became a common feature of the medieval political landscape. In all, and you're right, we have to look at all of Europe, in all of the emerging monarchies of Western Europe, Jews began to be thought of as especially subject to royal power. Slaves of the king's chamber is the famous phrase, servi revi in camera. According to a common legal formulation, they were even the king's private things. Kings increasingly claimed powers of protection, exploitation, and jurisdiction over all Jews, even those residing in the lands of magnates who otherwise minimally recognized those kings' overlordship. And kings used those claims to extend the reach of their sovereignty. By the late 14th century, so by 1391, a long history of such claims had made Jews the figure of supreme subjection to the sovereign's will. When Joan I, the king of Catalonia-Aragon during the massacres, was asked in 1391, before the massacres, whether the Jews at his realm of Sardinia should be judged under Catalan or Aragonese law. And he said, "It is our intention that the Jews, who are our patrimony and have no specific nation, may and should be judged according entirely to our own will." No law. Now the Jews' utter subjection to royal will and the protection it implied was carved upon the new gates of Valencia in 1390 in the form of the king's and queen's coat of arms. Conversely, precisely because Jews represented royal power at its most absolute, they could be used to represent that power, as when Jews were assigned the care of the royal lions in Barcelona, Zaragoza, and Valencia, in all of the Crown of Aragon's principal cities, a pairing in which both the lion and his keeper were equally symbolic. In this sense, royal power defined itself through the exceptional status of the Jews, and it is my contention that this point is crucial if we wish to understand both medieval politics and medieval anti-Judaism. Such assertions and definitions of sovereignty over the Jews were useful in the formation of royal power, but also dangerous in that they encouraged a tendency to criticize terrestrial sovereignty as itself Jewish, that's always in quotation marks, or Judaizing. That tendency was already latent in patristic authors like St. Augustine, who went so far as to place all earthly politics under the sign of the exiled Cain, the same figure he used for the Jews, because, quote, the politics of this world has its good in this world and rejoices in the material world with such joy as such things can afford. In other words, it doesn't go beyond the material world. Few medieval theorists drew the more radical implications of this position, namely all secular power is Jewish. They preferred to develop theologies that aligned the governor's interest with God. But royal exploitation of Jews did provide an obvious point of purchase for those who wished to associate royal claims to fiscal and legal power with Judaism. Such associations occurred throughout Western Europe, but I will limit my examples here to the 14th century Crown of Aragon, when King Juan's father, Peter IV, demanded taxes from the town council of Valencia that they viewed as uncustomary, as extraordinary. They responded that the demand is, quote, "nothing more than to make a Jewry out of each of your municipalities. We will not give in to such a demand. We would rather die than be similar to the Jews." In the Crown of Aragon, as elsewhere in Western Europe, Jews were a focal